Peace and blessings upon Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. We praise Allah for all the blessings He has given us, and the greatest blessing being that He allowed us to be of the ones who remain steadfast, dedicated, and loyal on the path of our Master after the Prophet, the commander of the faithful, the prince of the believers, the protector of the Prophet and his message, Al-Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. We praise Allah for this blessing and every blessing, for without Allah we would have nothing. Assalamu alaikum, my dear respected brothers, my dear respected sisters, wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Over the past few nights, we've had the opportunity to examine a few rules, principles, laws as we're calling them in this series. As we develop through these laws, I hope and I pray that you're connecting these principles and these ideas in the most practical way and how you implement these things into your own life to serve as a paradigm, as a worldview, and how you not just see the world, see yourself, but also implement in your life. Too much it's emphasized, whether intentionally or not, that religion plays a theoretical, conceptual role in our lives. And when it comes to practice, when it comes to a person's real day-to-day, they usually go to other things. They usually go to other sources. Again, whether they realize it intentionally or not. My hope and my prayer in these nights, and especially in the blessed commemoration of Imam Ali alayhi salam, is that we see with Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam not just a part of our lives, but the foundation of our lives. Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, and ultimately Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala want each and every one of us to be successful, want each and every one of us to be happy, want each and every one of us to have the best of what this world has to offer and what the next world, what the next life has to offer. But you and I, we have the challenge before us, like every human being before us and like every human being after us. We have the tests and trials of this life. You and I, we have competing faculties that make up who we are as human beings. We have, of course, our intellect, something that we share with the angels. We have, of course, our desire, our innate carnal desires, our anger. We have some of these things that are almost similar to animals. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created the human being with the potential of being better than the angels, but at the same time being worse than animals. So when we're emphasizing, how do I not just take on and assume a certain belief, a religion, a school of thought? I say, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, wa ashhadu anna Aliyan waliyullah. I've established for myself, at least by speech, that I believe in these things. I testify to the oneness of God, to the message and messengerhood or prophethood of the Prophet, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the imamah, the successorship, the guardianship of Imam Ali alayhi salam. But how does that translate into your actions? How does that translate into your family life? How does that translate into your work life? How does that translate into the way I see when I'm at my lowest point and when I'm at my highest point? Have you ever had a prayer that you just really wanted? Something that you were really wanting? Something that you spent days and nights asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for? Is there anything that you can think of? Maybe there's something that you have in your heart, in your mind in these nights that you really want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to answer this prayer for you. Has anyone ever had something that they really wanted? Raise your hand. MashaAllah. Now when that prayer, you may have something now. Maybe you've been in a similar situation before. When that prayer was answered by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and you got that thing, how did you respond? How did you respond? Yes, alhamdulillah, beautiful. But how quickly did you move on to the next thing? You may have been in a state of appreciation and gratitude for a day, for a week even, maybe even a month. But how quickly did you move on to the next thing? when we're looking at, and I'm just using this as an example to set the framework for us, to set the mindset for us as we continue to build into these laws, these rules, these principles that we're building on every single night. We've talked about the law of life, how significant the human life is given to us from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that you and I, we have to see ourselves as significant, not as more significant than the next, but significant with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We've talked about the law of thought, the freedom of thought. We've talked about the law of love. And tonight we talk about the law of leadership. When you and I want to see in ourselves the leaders that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made within us. Meaning what? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in your essence as a human being, in your very creation, you and I are the sons and daughters of whom? You and I are the sons and daughters of whom? Adam alayhi salam. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in Surah Al-Baqarah, His conversation with the angels, telling them, I am planning to create, I'm planning to make in this earth a vicegerent, a successor, a khalifa. From whom? From Adam. You and I want you to see, my dear brothers and sisters, and inshallah, I'm going to start off with Adam alayhi salam and then take it further and further for us to see how deep our spiritual heritage is, how deep our history is. Unfortunately, many of us, when we think of our leadership, when we think of our religiosity, when we think about our experience as a community, we only think about maybe as long as we've lived, the length of our lives. Maybe a little bit shorter, maybe a little bit longer. 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, right? The past century. But we realize our spiritual heritage and our history is much deeper than that. It goes from our very creation all the way back to our father Adam alayhi salam. And with Adam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created him with a beautiful purpose. He created him to represent him on earth. So you and I, as the sons and daughters of Adam, our very purpose is connected to that representation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation of Adam, as a representative for him on earth, to bring forth the virtues and the greatness that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted in His creation, we were up for a challenge. Because at the very onset of it, what did you have? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling the angels, I'm making a guardian, khalifa, a successor, a leader, a representative, a vicegerent in this earth. And I want you to prostrate before him at my command. All of them prostrated. The command was given to the angels and those with the angels. All of them prostrated except Iblis. Aba wastakbar. Iblis refused and was arrogant. Why won't you prostrate? In another verse of the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked him, why won't you prostrate? Why won't you be with those who prostrate? Why? Because you've created me from fire and you created him of clay, and fire is better than clay. I'm better than him. I'm only going to prostrate to you. That's who I'm going to prostrate to. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala kicked Iblis, who became a shaitan, Satan, kicked him out of his grace. And Iblis asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, give me at least the ability to show you that I'm better than them, better than Adam. Allow me the ability to mislead them. Allow me the ability to bring them away from you. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, you can have that. But what's the reality? The Iblis will not be able to do such a thing, will not be able to mislead the sons of Adam and the daughters of Adam, of those who are truly committed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now we start off with this story in this principle that we have in the law of leadership. And we see the connectedness of, as human beings, we often have for us our heroes, those who we look up to, those who we follow, and those who are the nemesis of our heroes. When you have Adam and Iblis. And Iblis made a commitment with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that I've been worshiping you all this time. I refuse to prostrate before someone who is not as good as me. I'm going to show you. We find for ourselves one of the characteristics that is at odds with a God-centric leadership, which is only and can only be servant leadership. You see arrogance as that vice. And Iblis manifested that vice. He became the embodiment of that vice. I mentioned the other night that Iblis, it's narrated in one of his prostrations, just a single one of his prostrations, was 3,000 years long. 3,000. But what do you and I prostrate to? When we are doing our sujood, when we are doing our ruku', when we are in the state of salah, when we are in the state of worship, ibadah, which by the way can be in your ruku', in your sujood, or can be sitting here, or can be working at home, could be at your office, could be at school. You can be in the state of ibadah wherever you are. Are you aligned with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants for you in this life? So when we're looking at the very basis, the very foundation, we find that in order for us, my dear brothers and sisters, in order for us to get closer to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants for us of leadership, one, we have to be in a state of servitude. We have to be God-centric. We have to have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the center of our lives, not our egos. And that's why, and inshallah tonight, we're going to delve a little bit deeper into, we're starting off with Adam, our creation, our purpose. And we're going to go all the way to what we see today in the age of the occultation, in the Asr al-Ghayba. This age of occultation that we've been experiencing since the occultation began with our holy Imam, our 12th holy Imam, Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajah al-Sharif, in 941 CE. For over 1,000 years, Imam al-Mahdi has been in Ghayba. And we have an Imam that hasn't left us alone. In fact, in the last letter, one of the last letters of the Imam before his Ghayba, he emphasized to his Shia, to his followers, in the new matters, in the challenges that you have before you, go back to the narrators of our hadith. The narrators of our hadith. Then who are they? Narrators of our hadith are referring to the scholars of our faith, those of knowledge. And if anyone is amongst you, from the instructions of the Imams, from the instructions of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, if there are ones amongst you who are upright in their character, ones who oppose their whims, follow the rulings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then follow him. So for 1,000 years, you and I have had a system of servant leadership that is based on knowledge, education, humility, the virtues that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants for us in the institution of Marjaeya. Now, when I look at the institution of Marjaeya and I see it, and I see the grand ayatullahs that the Shia, the followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, have been following for over 1,000 years. Some try to argue and say that the institution of Marjaeya has only been here for a couple hundred years. And that's a fallacy. That's wrong. In fact, the institution of Marjaeya has been existent here. Even our scholars tell us, and I benefited specifically in this particular point from some of the works of the late Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Muhammad Sa'id al-Hakim, in some of the references they had to Marjaeya as in what was instituted even before Imam al-Mahdi, as early as Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, and even earlier, where the Imams would tell their companions to go back to the most knowledgeable of the companions in their areas. So the idea of going back, al-ruju', two scholars, two leaders, the Imams began enfranchising and empowering their followers to do so even during their lifetimes. But it became institutionalized during the Ghayba of Imam al-Mahdi. Now during this Ghayba, you've had the likes of Sheikh al-Mufid and Sheikh al-Tusi from the earliest times, from 10th century and the 11th century, all the way until our postmodern era with the likes of His Eminence, may Allah prolong his life, the Grand Ayatollah, Sayyid Ali Sistani. And we've seen throughout this period of time, over these thousand years, this millennia, that these individuals have, one, never promoted themselves, never put themselves out there telling people you should follow me. But instead, it was that people gathered around them and wished to follow them because they saw the virtue in them. And when you look at their service, they were always there as taught to them by Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. They were always there for the most marginalized and most disenfranchised parts of society. The orphans, women, children, people that didn't have anyone to help and support them. And I'm going to give you guys a story. And inshallah, you see the connectedness between how we, in our very purpose as human beings, our leadership can only come through the servitude of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that when we are seeking knowledge and trying to be better versions of ourselves, but we have some of us who need to answer the call so that others can follow and fulfill the responsibility that they have religiously, fiqhan, jurisprudentially, in the time of ghaiba. Because by the way, specifically the idea of Marjaeya and taqleed, going back to a scholar, wasn't just a matter of convenience, but rather it became something jurisprudentially as an intellectual conclusion that a person in the time of ghaiba would need to go back to somebody to give them their religious duty. What is the religious ruling in this situation or that situation? Because I don't have direct access to the Imam. Yes, the Imam is with us. He is the sun behind the clouds. He sees me, he feels me. And I benefit from him, but I don't have direct access to the Imam to ask him, what can I do or should I do in this situation? So, Shar'an, you and I have a few options, 3 options. In Asr al-Ghaiba, in the era of the occultation, over the past 1,000 years and beyond, you and I can either become mujtahideen, so that we can deduce the religious ruling for ourselves, and that we fulfill that duty, or we do ihtiyat, we do precaution in everything, or we do taqleed, where we go back to a scholar and they give us the religious duty. There's a concept, a theme, in the book that I translated for the late Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Muhammad Sa'id al-Hakim, his book called Marjaeya, A Candid Conversation. There's a concept, a theme that he continued to emphasize throughout the book, which was Ibra' al-Dhimma. Ibra' al-Dhimma is this idea of having a clear conscience before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now some of us, when we're thinking about our religious duty, if you dig deeper into it, beyond what we've inherited from our families, beyond what we have from our community, at the end of the day, you and I each have an obligation before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm going to my grave alone. You're going to your grave alone. Nobody's taking you with them, and you're not taking anybody with you. We don't get buried together, right? And even if physically you were to have a grave next to another person, at the end of the day, each of us is there by themselves. So in connecting with this journey from Allah to Allah, inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un, during this time that we have on earth, we have to fulfill our duty before God. So our Maraja emphasize, and the late Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Muhammad Sa'id al-Hakim emphasized in his book, this idea of Ibra' al-Dhimma, having a clear conscience before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this idea of Ibra' al-Dhimma, the easiest way to have that was for a person to do taqleed. Meaning what? I'm going to go back to the experts. The experts in religion, just like you and I, if we were to have a medical procedure, a surgery, you would go to the best doctors, the best experts in healthcare, in medicine. Similarly, when it comes to your religion, you would go to the people, the experts in that. So you'd ask, who should I follow from these individuals? And you'd follow. It's very simple. Now, when I'm looking at this experience from all the way to Shaykh al-Mufid to today with Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Sistani and all of our Maraja, may Allah prolong all of their lives, you see that the way they grew up and the way they were raised from their early age there was an emphasis on the principles that by the time they reached the age of leading a group of people, they were able to answer the call in the most appropriate and wise way. And what do I mean by that? Our Marjaeya, from the ages of 4 and 5, their training began. Literally. 4 and 5. Recitation of the Holy Quran. Beginning to understand the ahkam, the religious rulings. Beginning to learn and be educated on hadith. The ages of 4 and 5. Now, you and I, we may look at our children and say they're too young. But that's not the case. Our kids, our people, our young adults are only as young as we want to keep them. But if we want to inspire a new generation of leadership, and we want to inspire them to step up in maturity, then we need to treat them as we wish to see them, not where we think they're at. So when I see a young man, a young woman, right? And they're already at the state of bulugh, they already have their taklif. I see a 9-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old, a 13-year-old. I can't look at them as children and treat them as if they're immature. They're not going to understand. No, I need to bring them close to me. I need to begin teaching them. And teaching them in the way that's the most effective way to teach. Speak to them not at their level, but speak to them at their level. Speak to them at their level. Meaning what? I need to speak and communicate in a way that's going to be the most effective for the way that they see the world. Not because they're seeing a world at a lower level than us. Our youth, our children are amazing. We just need to empower them, but at the same time, make sure that they realize we expect a seriousness out of them. You're not a kid. You're not a kid where you can just mess around. There's time for fun, and we all want to have fun. We all want to have a good time. In fact, it's part of our religion to make sure that our kids, our families play and have a good time. Our Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam with Al-Hasan wal-Husayn. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. With the Imam Al-Hasan, Imam Al-Husayn, when they were children, under the age of 7, the Prophet used to get on his knees with them and play with them. The Prophet in his prayer, if one of his grandsons was coming onto his back and he was in the state of sujood, he would prolong his sujood so that his grandson can continue to play. Between Imam Al-Hasan and Imam Al-Husayn, they would wrestle as children with each other. And the Prophet would wrestle with them. And the Prophet would encourage them with each other. I want you to imagine that as a scene. I want you to imagine that. Rasulullah is with Al-Hasan and Al-Husayn. And they're wrestling and they're playing. And he's wrestling with them and he's playing with them. But at the same time, when he's on his minbar, when he's on his seat, giving his sermon, they're also sitting in his lap. They're also listening. Imam Al-Hasan alayhi salam, by the age of 4, he was already a muhaddith, a person sharing the narrations of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi. He was already one who was memorizing the revelation, the verses from the Holy Quran. At the age of 4. Now, by the way, this isn't just something that we see from Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. From Ahlul Bayt, they would raise their companions and their followers the same way. So don't kind of hear this and say, well, that's Ahlul Bayt. Ahlul Bayt are immaculate. Ahlul Bayt are perfect. No. This is the way they raised their companions and their followers. You see, for the example, Fidda, who was the servant of a Sayyidah Fatima alayhi salam. Fidda, by the end of her life, all she communicated with people, she literally communicated, responding to them only through verse from the Holy Quran. Only through verses from the Holy Quran. We need to raise the level of our expectations of each other. Our standards need to go higher. Now, what do I mean by that? Do I mean that we have low standards and we need to... No, we don't have low standards. But I think sometimes we may have our attention on areas that aren't necessarily going to benefit us the most. My dear brothers and sisters, as a humble servant, as a humble brother with you all, I found that in studying history and in my own lived experience, when you make your religion your foundation, you become successful and happier and more content in everything. In your work life, in your family life, in your social life, in all aspects of your life, you begin to see things in a different way. Yes, you may want to get a great career and make a lot of money, and you should. You should be one who wants to provide for their family. You should be one who wants to contribute to your community. You should. You shouldn't have one of low expectations. However, how are you trying to get that accomplished in your book, in your mind? How are you trying to achieve that? When you go back to Ahlul Bayt, you go back to the companions of Ahlul Bayt, you go back to our Marjaeya, who, by the way, our Marjaeya, they're not just individuals who have dedicated their lives to scholarship and deriving for you the religious ruling so that you and I can have ibra' al-dhimma, a clear conscience before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We do taqleed, we have our prayers, we do our fasts, we know what the ahkam are, etc., etc. But these are individuals who have saved the lives of thousands and thousands, if not millions of people throughout history. Now, what was I saying earlier about children, how they're raised? Our scholars are raised in a certain way so that by the time they get to a challenging situation, like in 2014, when Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Sistani issued his fatwa to all able-bodied Iraqi citizens to respond to the threat of the terrorist entity ISIS that had invaded Iraq. And this came a day after the Spiker massacre. I don't know if all of you recall and remember, but on June 12, 2014, in the city of Tikrit, about 1,700 young Iraqi cadets were gathered up in trucks. Young guys. Many of them only 18, 19 years old, like some of you here. They were gathered up in trucks and they were told by these men from the terrorist group ISIS that no worries, we're actually not coming here to do you any harm. We're actually just going to be taking you, transporting you all you young men, to the presidential palace, where then you're going to go from there back home. Because most of these young men that were stationed in this city in northern Iraq were not from the area. Most of them were from the south. But they gathered them up, they took them to the roadside, and they massacred them. Nearly 2,000 young Iraqi men were just butchered on that day. The very next day, Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Sistani, on June 13th, issues a fatwa saying that in response to this terrorist group and for the sovereignty of Iraq, and I want you to see the wisdom of our Marjaeya, and inshallah in the coming days we're going to delve deeper into what this leadership actually looks like and how you and I can better understand our context as Shia Muslims today and the power that we have within our societies, that our faith allows us to be ones who not only survive in our society but thrive in it, contribute to it, and empower it. Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Sistani responded with his fatwa, calling on not all Shia, calling on not all Muslims, calling on all Iraqis, calling on not all people coming from all over the world to come into Iraq, but instead calling on all Iraqis, respecting the sovereignty of Iraq, to respond to the terrorism of ISIS. And subhanAllah, just with one statement, tens of thousands of young Iraqis responded to the call of the Marjaeya, not as Shia, not as Muslims, but as Iraqis. wanting to protect the sovereignty of their country, wanting to protect humanity. And that was the call of the Marjaeya. The wisdom of the Marjaeya was that it saw its context and wanted to make sure that people saw in the Shia Muslim paradigm one that was never sectarian, one that was never based on, oh, I will feed you, I will quench your thirst, I will protect you on the basis of you saying, Aliyun Waliullah. No, absolutely not. Imam Ali alayhi salam himself didn't look at people and ask them, what's your creed or what's your faith? The elderly Christian man that was begging, we recalled the other day, Imam Ali alayhi salam made sure that all of the people knew, you're to take care of this man. You can't neglect him because he professes a different faith than you. No. And you see from the leadership of Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Sistani, as well as the leadership of all of the Maraja before him. Because this came from what? When I said we have a deep spiritual religious heritage and history, it isn't unique in one person. It's something that has been passed down from the teachings of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam and the leadership of our Maraja, who we should be proud to follow because of what they bring forth to humanity. It's something that has been there for centuries. So when Sayyid Sistani emphasizes for national sovereignty, emphasizes even before 2014, emphasizes that when the Imam Askari shrine was attacked in 2006 and civil strife in Iraq was at the all-time high and people were at each other's throats, he would say that the Shia is not to attack the Sunni. And in other times during the civil strife in Iraq, emphasizing for the rights of all people and telling his own followers that when especially certain minority groups in Iraq were being threatened by terrorists, by extremists, Sayyid Sistani would say that for the Christians and the Yazidis and all other minority groups, that he would say to his followers, our followers need to fight and demand for their rights before they demand for their own rights. As Shia Muslims, we're not here to compete. We're here to enlighten. We're not here to threaten. We're here to empower. We're not here to be victimized either. We're here to understand. When we go back to the masa'ib of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, it's not to bring forth a thought of woe is me. It's meant to bring forth wa waylah, what they went through in order to protect the faith. So it demands from you and I tonight, when we recite the Musibah of Imam Ali alayhi salam, the Musibah of Sayyidah Zainab alayhi salam, I don't want you to see Sayyidah Zainab alayhi salam as this person who just cried over herself. No. Sayyidah Zainab alayhi salam was crying over Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib because of how much she ached for truth, how much she ached for justice, how much she ached for humanity, how much she ached for the light that was supposed to come forth and bring people out of the darkness, but the people refused the light. So when I cry over Zainab, when I cry over Imam Ali alayhi salam, I'm crying over them, yes, remembering that very human experience of tragedy, but then bringing forth a greater sense of awareness into the way I see the world and the responsibility I have to use my faith as what? Within my context and within my society to show how we are at service of everyone. Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Sistani would tell people repeatedly, tell the people of Iraq repeatedly, our religion is a religion of love. Remember yesterday how we said, Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam would say, is religion anything but love? And is love anything but religion? Sayyid Sistani would say, our religion is a religion of love and I love you all. Our Maraja, before Sayyid Sistani, Sayyid al-Khu'i, before Sayyid al-Khu'i, Sayyid Muhsin al-Hakim, before Sayyid Muhsin al-Hakim, Sayyid al-Burjurdi, and all of the Maraja of the past, you see them always at service of people, always trying to see how can we make sure people are better off. Now, at the end of the day, our Maraja, our scholars, are human beings and are fallible human beings. But they took the lessons from Imam Ali alayhi salam. They took the lessons from Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. And they raised and were raised to be able to be ones who, as soon as they saw a need, they would try to fill it. The Marjaeya, as it addresses the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of orphans, for example, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and other places in the world, you see the example that was set forth by Imam Ali alayhi salam on his deathbed, where he would continue to emphasize, God, by God, don't forget the orphans. God, by God, don't forget the orphans. Imam Ali alayhi salam, he would be the father of the orphans, taking care of them up until his very last moments. In the city of Kufa, the orphans of Kufa had gotten used to, for a few years now, had gotten used to food and treats and toys be brought to their doorsteps. And then in nights like this, the 19th, the 20th, and the 21st, the food, the treats, the things that they looked forward to were no longer brought to their footsteps. Maybe he'll come back. They didn't know who it was, because that man that would drop off to them every single night would be hooded, disguised his identity. But soon enough, the orphans would find out that the angel of their night would no longer come, because Ali ibn Abi Talib was killed. I ask you tonight, my dear brothers and sisters, as we commemorate on this night, to think about the orphans around the world. Think about the orphans that Imam Ali alayhi salam left behind. The orphans we have today, as well as the orphans from the past. And what you can do for them. If I tell you this tale of sorrow, if the brothers can just reduce the echo a little bit. It's a little too much, just like yesterday. Alhamdulillah. If I tell you this tale of sorrow, will you lend me your hearts to borrow? If I tell you this tale of sorrow, will you lend me your hearts to borrow? Will you shed a tear for Hussein? Will you remember Zainab's pain? And if we stay here tonight until tomorrow, will you bear this tale of sorrow? Listen here to Hussein's story, a story of heartache and glory, a story of heartache and glory. My dear brothers and sisters, when we go back to Muhammad wa al Muhammad, we see tragedy after tragedy, from Rasulullah to Sayyid al-Zahra to Amir al-Mu'mineen, to Al-Hassan wal-Hussein. In all of this, we remember Zainab's pain. Oh, Zainab, you were there when your grandfather was taken back to his Lord. Oh Zainab, you were there when your mother Fatima would soon follow. Oh Zainab, you were there with your father Ali. Oh Zainab, you were there with your brother Hassan. Oh Zainab, oh Zainab, you were there with Hussein. Oh Zainab, oh Zainab, oh Zainab, and on the day of Ashura, what name would you call? Who would you think of after Hussein was gone, after Al-Abbas was gone, after your brothers were taken, after your tents were set ablaze? Sayyidah Zainab would continue to call the name that you and I all call, Ya Ali, Ya Ali, Ya Ali. Oh Zainab, what did you see? Oh Zainab, what did you hear? Oh Zainab, what did you witness when you were on the bedside of your father Ali? When you found your father injured, bedridden, what would you tell him and what would he tell you? Imagine with me, my dear brothers and sisters, when Sayyidah Zainab would tell her father Ali, Father Ali, who will protect us after you? Father Ali, who will be with us after you? Imam Ali alayhi salam would tell her, oh Zainab, don't you see your brothers amongst you? At this time, my dear brothers and sisters, there was Al-Hassan, there was Al-Hussein, there was Jafar, Abdullah, the brothers of Sayyidah Zainab alayhi salam. But Sayyidah Zainab, as she would look to Al-Hassan and she would look to Hussein, she would remember from her childhood when Rasulullah would sit Al-Hassan wal-Hussein on his lap, embracing them and kissing them, kissing Al-Hassan on his face and kissing Hussein on his neck. Al-Imam Al-Hussein would ask Sayyidah Fatima, Ummah Fatima, why did my grandfather kiss me on my neck while he kissed my brother Hassan on the mouth, on his face? She would ask him. After Rasulullah, they went back into the room, finding him in sujood. He would raise his head. Remember the situation, my dear brothers and sisters in the land of Medina. As Sayyidah Zainab, she's reflecting back into her childhood when they were just small children. Sayyidah Fatima, her mother, would ask Rasulullah, Ya Abba, Father, O Messenger of Allah, my son Hassan, my son Hussein, You kissed one on the face, one on the neck. Why did you do this? Hussein asks. He tells her, my dear Fatima, it hurts my heart to tell you, but I kissed Hassan on the mouth, as that will be the place from which he is poisoned and killed. Sayyida Fatima would call out, Abba ya Rasulallah, is it that my son Hassan would be poisoned and killed? He says, yes, my daughter. And then she pauses, but you kissed al-Hussein on his neck. Why did you kiss him on his neck? He said, Al-Hussein will be slaughtered and killed in the land of Karbala. وَوَيْلَا وَحُسَيْنَا. Sayyida Fatima says, Ya Rasulallah, how is this so? He says, Ya Zahra, and he will be killed in a time without any of us. Not me, not you, not Ali, not Hassan will be there. Imagine, my dear brothers and sisters, Sayyida Zainab nearby, hearing Rasulullah recite the tragedy of Al-Imam Al-Hussein. None of them would be with Al-Imam Al-Hussein but Zainab. Sayyida Zahra tells Rasulallah, Ya Abba, if no one is there with him, who will recite his tragedy? Who will cry over him? Who will remember him? Who will mourn him? Rasulullah, it's narrated, he said that Allah will create for Hussein Shia, followers, muhibbeen, lovers that will remember him until the day of judgment. Allah has created in the heart of the followers of Hussein a fire, a passion that will never subside. She tells him, Ya Rasulallah, how will we repay these beautiful followers, these lovers, these muhibbeen? He says, Ya Fatima, I will be their shafi on the day of judgment. Hani'an laka ya muwali. Congrats to you, O lover, O follower of Hussein. Sayyida Fatima says, and I will walk them into paradise by the hand. Rasulullah looks at Imam Ali. He tells them, what will you do? He asks him, what will you do for them? He says, I will quench them from the fountain of paradise. Then he looks at Imam Al-Hassan, my son Hassan, what will you do for the lovers of Hussein? He tells him, I will walk aside them on the Sirat. And then they look at Hussein. Ya Aba Abdullah, what will you do for those who mourn you? What will you do for these people who remember you? It said Imam Al-Hussein would respond, whoever remembers me, I will remember them. Whoever visits me, I will visit them. I will never leave them. I will be with them in the hour of their death. when their soul is taken from their body, and I will be with them in their grave. So my dear brothers and sisters, when Sayyida Zainab is with her brothers Al-Hassan wal-Hussein at the bedside of Amir al-Mu'mineen, she doesn't want to burden Al-Hassan wal-Hussein. And then who comes forward? Al-Abbas, Qamar Bani Hashim. She looks at her younger Al-Abbas. She looks at her younger brother Al-Abbas. Imam Ali sees her looking at him. She tells him, he tells her, my son Abbas will be your protector, O Zainab. That is why we see on the day of Ashura the closeness of Sayyida Zainab to Al-Abbas, Qamar Bani Hashim. But what would happen on the day of Ashura when Al-Abbas would go to the Euphrates River and not return? When Al-Imam Al-Hussein would finally say, Al-An inkasara dhahri, and now my back is broken. When Al-Imam Al-Hussein would remove the pole of the tent of Al-Abbas, and the tent of Al-Abbas would fall, how would Zainab respond? Oh, protector of mine, oh, son of my father Ali, oh, full moon of our family, where have you gone, Abbas? Abbas, come back to us, leave the water. I wish I would die 1,000 lives. I wish I would die 1,000 deaths before your right arm was taken, before your left arm had fallen, before your face would meet the sands of Karbala. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by the sorrow of Sayyida Zainab, by the right of our Imam Ali alayhi salam, by the greatness and the sacrifices of his sons Al-Hassan wal-Hussein wal-Abbas, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept our grief, to accept our tears. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring us closer and closer to the path of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, so that we can be better sons and daughters for our families, so that we can be better husbands and wives for our families, so that we can be better fathers and mothers for our children. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to increase us in sustenance. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to heal the sick and the ill amongst us. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect the most vulnerable members of our society, the women, the children, anyone that is in need. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to fulfill those needs. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the reappearance of Sahib al-Asr wa al-Zaman, Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajul sharif. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to take the grief and the sorrow into our hearts and to bring it forth into that hastening of the reappearance of Sahib al-Asr wa Zaman, Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajhu al-Sharif. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala this and the last of our prayers. And alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen wa afdal as-salat wa taslim ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala ali baytihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. Allahumma salli ala